After all this, you still...
I still want that gas, yes. And you had better deliver.
All right, welcome back to the greenhouse, everybody. Josh, it's great to be back in the greenhouse with you as always.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's long overdue and for a major milestone, no less.
Yes, welcome everybody to our 100th episode. And we will be doing yet another Democalypse 2024 segment. Suffice to say, probably since December, this is our first explicit current events, U.S. politics coverage episode. And a question that me and you had been kind of talking about offline is we try to get a Congress episode like off the ground for a bit, and I kind of had a question of like how much has really changed since December, and maybe more broadly since October 7th, to be completely frank. And I guess let's start with there. Is like, what exactly have we missed since December? Have we really missed all that much?
I mean, in some ways we've missed little, in other ways we've missed a lot, right? And it's sort of, not to get overly, preachy with it, right? But like, especially, kind of with the reference to October 7th and whatnot, the situation in like Israel, Gaza, Palestine has not improved materially in any major fashion, right? We just had another major slaughter, but we do have, sort of this, the fact that we're personally isolated from it, right, does change things.
Yes.
So like, you have the Aaron Bushnell story, which I'm sure we'll get into. You had God, what are we calling that now? It's got a name. Like yesterday or this morning, there was the IDF just kind of opened fire on civilians who were scrounging for food. Some of the civilians did, admittedly kill each other on the way to getting food as well, just trampling each other, which I mean just shows, how horrible the conditions are there.
Exactly.
That, you're sort of brought into, kind of like just that base animalistic instinct, right, of just like doing anything to get food and stuff like that. Like you have to go through a lot to get to that spot where you have that level of disregard. Or, I mean, admittedly, stateside we see that on Black Friday too. That's maybe a different level of depravity that like, is part of the human condition too, though.
I think that just really goes to show at a point the paradigm that's been created for American viewers post October 7th, right? There is a attempt to dehumanize and strip of dignity any depiction of Palestinian civilians who are stuck in this conflict, right? And I think when it's not done rhetorically, it's done with explicit shows of violence like this, right? And it's incredibly shocking to the conscience. And to be frank, it's really affected how I approach things politically and even for the show to some extent, right? Like, how much of this can one person stand to look at passively on the internet, right? I've been offline a lot more as a consequence of this. And because of, like you said, the individual isolation as well as just the lack of individual options one can take to do something about this, right? It's an incredibly it's an incredibly depressing situation, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, there's really no other way to describe it. The Flower Massacre is what we've been calling today's event, which, I mean, appropriate, right? 100 people killed, 700 injured. There was, gosh, I don't know when this particular address was, but I saw it earlier with Raphael Warnock talking about how there's this the acronym for it was
wounded child, no living parents.
Yeah, wounded child, no living family.
Yeah.
So even worse, right? Like, I
Right.
mean, these people have no one. And I mean, and again, you still see kind of the dehumanization in the way it's covered in the media, right? You have just nonsense discussions about like where it's like like, oh hey, there's this chaotic incident where they were slaughtered today. Not like really anything you can to sort of rhetorically reduce the actual like harm being done, right? It's like, oh, this
Exactly.
is like a tragedy, but it's there was no agency that inflicted it, even though there
Hmm.
clearly is one, and that's just really part of the barbarism here, and there's so little you can do to respond to it, right? I mean, you have no real power in this situation, and frankly, right, the only people who do have power, we have no real leverage over, even as we try to, leverage some stuff, for some other folks who have maybe some indirect levers of power and whatnot there. But I mean, it's a heartbreaking situation, and there's really not any other way to describe it.
Exactly, and it's kind of how many times can we repeat such things on the podcast, or how many times can we log in on what is now like a really decrepit platform, Twitter. The only thing that's really
Mhm.
keeping it there is, the fact that people might still have mutuals who are still, pro-Palestine, or people who can give some kind of on the ground cover or some on the ground commentary, from the
And
site
I
sometimes, right?
I will say for the most part, I think the platform's still decent when it comes to, your access to those things. I
Right.
mean, of course, there's a lot of vitriol, like kind of, when you delve deeper into like the comments and whatnot. But I think, if you're just interested in seeing what's happening, as kind of horrible as it is, right? I mean, not to like kind of commodify the spectation of it, but it's like all those things that sort of tie into it are
Exactly.
it's at your fingertips, right? I mean, the IDF itself released aerial footage of this flower massacre too, and it's and again, I mean, I think that's the thing is like you're seeing so many pictures that are even posted by like direct perpetrators, right? There was one I saw the other day that I thought was particularly deplorable, where there was like some IDF soldier just cuddled up in some kid's crib,
Right.
that from some house that they had ransacked or whatever. It's like this is, uh, I mean, as horrible as the events of October 7th might have been, I can't fathom anyone considering the response to be remotely proportionate. Any as dehumanizing as like proportionate responses kind of are too.
Yeah, yeah.
There's nothing that it's really beyond the pale. Everything that's happened since.
Exactly. And I feel like there's no forum to discuss some of this sanely and even-headedly, which is kind of my frustration with the online space. Even though it can kind of get some of that information out there, it kind of has this weird effect of making you kind of bear witness to horrible things at the convenience of your fingertips, right? But
Right, yeah.
um
And you can ignore it at the convenience of your fingertips too.
it's unfortunately, yeah. And it's, in our media, we don't see too many, like it's like the whole thing about reporting this conflict in third person, right? You can't name specific actors, and doing so could tarnish your reputation, right? You
Yeah.
have a real move by, the holders of power in the United States to aid and abet all of it, right? And aside from BDS, which is frankly, it's, I mean, I don't know, anyone who's already dismissed BDS as some kind of like radical left conspiracy or as somehow anti-Semitic is, it's histrionic to claim that, in my opinion, right? BDS is the only thing you can do when you get everything through consumerism, right? It's the only like voting with your dollar is your only sizable action sometimes, right? So I mean
Well,
it's kind of
and to be clear, BDS, which I mean, for those who might not be familiar, that's
yeah,
boycott, divest, and what's the
sanctions.
last? sanctions, yes. Obviously, the only part that you can really personally engage with is probably boycott.
Exactly.
If you're slightly wealthier in our audience, maybe you can divest. But I'm gonna guess that probably doesn't refer to too many people. But if for those kind of like wondering, like, well, what can that apply to? On their website, they do have a list of like companies that you should like boycott and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Admittedly, like kind of like scrolling through the list, there's not a whole lot that I personally consume. But like, I mean, hey, like if you feel good about just sort of participating, even if it's sort of something you would already gonna do. I mean, like there's that element too. But I mean, like the big ones that kind of stand out to me, like Hewlett Packard, HP is on there. Sabra hummus as well. That's kind of a store
The
brand.
most trash hummus, you can make it better at home, trust me.
Yeah, to be fair, you could probably make it better in over there as well. But so they're not exactly importing their fine goods.
That is
They're
true.
exporting their fine goods.
Yeah, it's and that's the thing, right? Is I think with the response from the Biden administration, whether it's John Kirby taking the mic angrily, shouting at the press, whether it's Biden's, very out of touch statements, there is a real disconnect at all levels to talk about the complexities at play here, right? There's no way to talk about America's role in it. There's no way to talk about the return of certain Islamophobic narratives. There's no way to talk about the rising trend in anti-Semitism and how that, in fact, is tied to Zionism in certain extents. There's no way to talk about the history of the Zionist movement either. And it just kind of has created this malaise that lingers over not just all political discourse, but it's created a really numbing effect, right?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, like, some of this is like kind of just we're really witnessing sort of the long-term triumph of APAC and like other affiliated groups, right? In the sense that like the discourse for as long as I can remember, right, has been sort of dominated by like a more pro-Israel sentiment, but like it has gotten so much worse where like the notion of criticism of any action that state takes is dismissed. It's so dismissed that it's not even like allowed in the mainstream. So you have and like certainly the Biden administration's handling of this has not been good, right? That's kind of the baseline. But at the same time, there's other elements of this where and Bernie Sanders gotten a lot of flack too for some of his statements, and it's this weird like line that you have to tread of like is being slightly more pragmatic and less critical, but like you're able to maybe secure some material differences. Is that is that worthwhile? And like the answer is maybe, but we're not. The problem is, of course, right now we're not seeing like the material change either. So I mean, I guess, I mean, to be fair, Biden did say that we're likely approaching a ceasefire next week. Part of that makes me wonder if today's events were sort of like, hey, like let's sort of maximize the carnage while we can. I don't know.
I hope not, but yeah.
I hope not too. But I mean, it's hard to say. And yeah, I mean, it's just like there's so much that's like kind of, and the other problem too, right, is that there's no like there's no real meaningful action to like really take in terms of like changing things, right? I mean, we're gonna get into sort of the Michigan primary results, and kind of how they tie into this a little bit later. But like there's a lot of discussion about what like voting undecided really means and stuff, or uncommitted, what that really means and stuff like that. And it's like if you're in a situation where like, especially if you're part of the Muslim community and feels betrayed from this, it's not like you can just like vote for the other guy and
Exactly.
suddenly the situation's gonna be better. It's like, no, it's probably gonna make things worse. I mean, a lot of that the situation in Israel and Palestine was made worse when, Trump moved our embassy to Jerusalem and like
Hmm.
all these other things that like were done under that administration. And so it's like it's one of those things where it's just the secular political belief in the United States is just I mean, it support Israel no matter what, right? It's just sort of it doesn't really matter what party you're in. There's more opposition in the Democratic Party than there is in the Republican one, but those people aren't necessarily. I mean, they're kind of barred from the real levers of power within this country.
Yeah. Speaking to that point, because there's a bunch of threads we might have to untangle here, right? And
Mhm.
we'll do it. So we've talked about this in past episodes, and this is a subject that ties into the interview we did with Professor Hajar Yazdiha on her book, right? There's a chapter in it talking about how Muslim Americans became a voting bloc, it's shifting away from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party,
Yeah.
post 9/11, right? That whatever bridge that conservatives might have had uh to keep, Muslim Americans as this kind of like professional middle class voting bloc,
Mhm.
that bridge was burned a very, very long time ago. To
Yeah.
the and like there's an anecdote in her book where she basically talks about how there was this like Long Island Muslim chapter that was like a like a political patron of like Representative Peter King, I think, or whatever. And the minute 9/11 happened, he burns them politically. And that that loss of loyalty is remembered by people, right? I think we've talked in the past about how people treat like this was with like regards to like the student loan stuff, right? Where it's like people get pissy about offering um something in exchange for a vote, right? Like votes can't be transactional. Well, it's the same thing with like, group loyalties
There's
to
a very
parties.
bizarre demonization of that in this
Yeah.
country. I think it's like rooted in like the Reagan night era and whatnot. Like, I mean, certainly if you talk to anyone, even like more liberal people that are of a certain age, like if they were
Right.
born, if they like grew up in like the 70s and 80s, the culture of like, you know, social security, like social welfare is bad, is inundated within those people where they like, they would rather starve to death than go on, social welfare because it's just so stigmatized
Right.
within that cultural sphere. And like I think it's the same with this.
It is the same, right? Where it's like even lip service to your demographic in like dire moments is real political capital you might earn, right?
Yeah.
And the Biden administration has functionally, they kind of were able to demand the old Obama coalition to show up for them at gunpoint in 2020 a bit, right?
Hmm.
You can argue some of that was in good faith. You can argue some of that was really necessary. You can argue that he may have even intended to deliver on some of those promises, right? But all that
Well,
capital has. Well, go ahead, go ahead.
I was gonna say to the extent that he has delivered on some things, I'd argue he like, and this is maybe speaks to ironically maybe his faults as a politician. I think he's delivered probably more for more groups than Obama has.
Like he
Admittedly,
won't even take credit for like his W's.
exactly, yeah.
And when he does take an L, he's quick to outsource it. Like I don't know what it is with Biden where he gives this very deep energy of someone should do something
Yes.
while like at the Oval Office. Like Truman's very iconic with that "the buck stops here" placard on his
Mhm.
desk. You don't see that with Biden. And basically what I was trying to get at, right, is you know, everyone is getting kind of pissy with younger voters for other reasons, but they're getting pissed with even the notion that um Arab or Muslim Americans would take offense to this change in policy and would try to demand something
Well,
of
it's like the continuation of this policy. It's not so much a change.
right, right.
They want to change.
Yeah, and basically like it's hit at a new point of like, wow, this fucking sucks, you know?
Yeah.
October 7th is the paradigm shift of, okay, wow, the United States really went all in. So people are getting pissy that like people are saying, hey, can we not, immiserate civilians in all of this? And that is getting met with such a derisive tone, and you know, the recurring motif from the liberal commentary that I get, the Biden loyalist coalition, if you will, is you owe him your vote, shut the fuck up and get in line. And I don't know the origins of this mentality. I don't understand why it happens kind of organically in like this hive mind way, but it has it's exhibited itself in a really, really bad way.
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. I mean, I wouldn't say it's new to Biden. That
Yeah.
particular phenomenon of just, I mean, it's that vote blue no matter who type mentality, um, which there's some pragmatic stuff behind that, but like really, it's like the type of people who like I truly believe they fundamentally do not care what the president does as long as they have a D next to their name. Like that's just the vibe I've gotten from when I worked with them on different campaigns and whatnot. I mean, I remember in 2016, the primary hadn't quite been settled yet. You had there was like these older women that were at like this party event. They looked like the fates from Greek mythology. And we're basically talking like them too, to be honest.
Oh
But they were
no.
just so bothered by like how like Bernie Sanders was running he's not a true Democrat. He doesn't, he's not a Democrat in Congress. That's the fundamental objection with him. It's not that what he says is bad, not that what he says is unreasonable in their mind. They might, say that, but their fundamental issue was why isn't he a full-time registered Democrat using our resources? Like, screw him. And there's very much that like sort of, I don't know, just the idea that like it's sort of this, it's your destined turn, right? That was Hillary in 16, kind of in 08, but they came along, they mostly went back in line. That was Biden in 20, right? It's sort of that attitude. And like I don't know. I mean, we've really poisoned the notion of like what representative democracy means in the
Mm-hmm.
United States, right? There's not like this idea of this is supposed to be like these people are supposed to be like vessels of our power in the system, right? They're supposed to sort of, kind of deliver on basic things for us and whatnot. And I don't know what where that's emerged from exactly. As I said, I think it's something like the 70s and 80s. I think we really just kind of had this cultural grip, this conservative cultural grip that I don't think has ever really gone away. I think I don't think it's there for like Zoomers and to an extent millennials either.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's still like older generations and the ones that frankly turn out to vote and whatnot. Those are the ones where like they treat politics like almost like a religious exercise where like outcomes matter, but in the most superficial sense, right? Where it's like it just matters who is doing the outcome. That's what's most important.
Yeah, if you look at like Robert Bella's American civic religion thesis, like that is the polity of that religion, so to speak.
And I was thinking about this too. There was the one clip you shared with me last week from I think it was the second episode that Jon Stewart was on the Daily Show with his new run, where it was like
Mm-hmm.
the thing about with Tucker Carlson, where it's like, oh, like these pretty simple things that Russia has that are slightly better off than here, and aren't even really that much better off if you actually investigated the issue more, if at all. And he's like, well, that's the price of freedom. And like that's like I'm like that is the civic religion that was like beat into us, right? Was that like there are costs to freedom, and that they're basically like this is why we can't have nice things costs. And I think there's like this fundamental like failure to recognize how dangerous that mentality is, especially in our current moment, right? Because that attitude is exactly why you have people that are getting radicalized in circles that are probably not the circles you want them radicalized in and stuff like
Mhm.
that, right?
Mhm.
Because like, well, if that's the price of freedom, then why not vote for an autocrat, right? Why not just embrace autocracy? Because if the price of freedom is shit, then like we sacrifice that. That means we get all these good things, right? And I think it's kind of a dangerous, like when you really like take that to its natural conclusion, it's a dangerous thing to sort of kind of throw your weight behind.
It's funny you mentioned Stewart's anecdote there, right? Because I have a visceral memory of Stephen Colbert when he took over the Late Show or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, he did a similar takedown of a speech with Putin or whatever again back in that day, and Putin is talking about America's own crimes, and Putin is also talking about, well, this is why we can't have political freedom on our side for our security, right?
Yeah.
And in like a mirror image of what Jon Stewart just did, he's like, see, that kind of cynicism is what allows autocracy to it's a very unique blindness, and like in zeroing in on one person's hypocrisy, you completely negate the possibility of exposing your own, or sorry, you negate the possibility of shutting up before you realize your own, right?
Yeah, and even if it's not necessarily hypocrisy, it's something that's like, as I said, like when you think about it enough, right? Because we're our civic religion is like, I mean, it's not like, oh, hey, because Jon Stewart was such an important cultural fixture, we all sort of buy into this idea. Like it's something that's just like ingrained to us in like sort of like liberal culture and stuff like that.
Right, right.
And it's not to say that, aren't issues with freedom, right? I mean, like there's the freedom to disagree and stuff like that. And that's, sort of like, the fracturing of and polarization of our society a bit, right? But when it comes to like the idea that like, hey, if the trade-off is autocracy and nice things, nice material things and freedom, a lot of people are willing to take that trade, right? And like
Hmm.
there's no reason why those things should be mutually exclusive.
Exactly.
And in some ways, right, this is why we can't have nice things. Thing is used as like a point of like lecture, right, where it's like you don't
Hmm.
deserve to have nice things because you have freedom, like, and obviously, kind of, depending on how deep into political theory you get, right, there's the idea of like we, have political freedom, but the lack of economic freedom is like the
Yeah.
real like, sort of detractor from democracy and stuff like that.
Hmm. Hmm. So, with that being said as well, I think we probably should also speak, maybe just briefly, on Aaron Bushnell's self-immolation protest. I know there's been a lot of hay made about it, and to be frank, like it is a macabre subject. I'm not going to deny that. Um, I'm not
Yeah.
going to make objective claims about anything with him because I just I saw it happen, and I saw the take machine just go into overdrive, and something about seeing the take machine go into overdrive over something that significant like kind of sickened me, right? But at the same time, it kind of deserves to be mentioned that this is part of the a long, I don't know if calling it a tradition makes sense, but self-immolation
Yeah.
is a form of protest, right?
Yeah, I mean, tradition's a weird way to
That is
describe
a very
it.
weird way to
Yeah.
say it, but I would say pattern. I would say pattern, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, tradition makes it sound like, it's just like, oh yeah, well, every year we sort of draw straws and whoever gets the short one.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, to kind of speak on it, right, is that he comes from this very conservative evangelical background. He's a U.S. airman, and makes the decision to take his life as a form of protest in front of the Israeli embassy. His last words being "Free Palestine," right? Like the intent is 100% clear here. The motives are 100% clear, even if
Yeah.
there's a whole discussion intertwined about mental health and was this really effective and all that. the
Well,
the end
and
goal
yeah,
was
like that's
understandable, right?
and that stuff was so like it's so like just vicious, right? Where it's like, oh well, like only a mentally unwell person would burn himself. It's like clearly, I mean, I would probably agree that there's like something that's like wrong with you to like think that that's like the solution. But to like say like, oh well, then therefore everything else he believes is also bunk, is just so like demeaning and whatnot, right? Like we have this
Right.
I mean, again, like we have such a bad mental health stigma in this society as well,
Hmm.
despite the fact that we use it as like this ultimate scapegoat for you know anything, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
it's not the guns, it's mental health, and like, yeah, we won't ever do anything about it, but we'll um always keep it around as like this perennial scapegoat.
Yep. And I think it's, to talk about the way that October 7th has set a new paradigm, where a lot of people are trying to avert their eyes, where a lot of people are feeling numb or burnt out by it. And the powers that be explicitly, have chosen what path they want to take with it, right? Um, of course, there
And
is.
I was gonna add real quick that
Yeah, yeah.
I'm partly thinking that the path we're taking is just that there's such a desperation for like just the optics of getting people in Washington to work together. And for whatever reason, Israel's the one thing that you can get, solid consensus across the aisle for,
Hmm.
which doesn't make a whole I mean, I don't know. Like to me, it's like it's kind of baffling that there's very little like, especially now where like honestly, I feel like October 7th itself feels like a distant memory at this point, right? Like
Quite honestly, yeah.
the actual events of it that actually spur this on have largely kind of like vanished from the discourse, right? It's been primarily focused on, I mean, the fact that like you're getting like these civilian slaughters day in and day out, and it's like I mean to me like one thing that like strikes me as odd is like we still have never really gotten like we want to pass Israel aid. It's like, well, what is this really going to, why do they need it?
Hmm.
Right? Like it's not Ukraine and Russia where Ukraine is like this, scurvy underdog or whatever. This is, you know, the dynamic is almost completely reversed. Like what does Israel need the aid for? Like where is like the actual like pitch?
And that's the thing, examining it, would reveal something so disturbing that it would call the whole project into question, right? And that's I don't like to do the reductive they don't want you to know, man, take, but ignorance is kind of a big issue for how this thrives, right? And if it's not that, it's getting people wrapped up in, evangelical Zionism for
Mhm.
sure, right?
Right.
And it's, to speak on that, right? Like Aaron Bushnell, like his will to his brother came out, right? And
Mhm.
he kind of talks about like there was a little bit of hay made about like, well, why his brother and not his parents? And there were statements made by his parents, and suddenly you see like these are
Yeah.
evangelicals who believe in like the end times, and they have that whole thing about, the shit's gonna go down in the Holy Land, and we need it to happen to get raptured. And suddenly you can kind of see like Aaron's life trajectory in a way, right? And you can kind of see
Yeah.
the madness that led him down this path.
Right. I mean, and like, yeah, I think that dynamic with like the parents probably played a non-zero role in, how that played out ultimately, right?
Right. It's, if we see these trends happen politically at national and state levels, we can reasonably extrapolate them into people's lives, can't we? It's not too much of a stretch.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, like a lot of we always kind of, like oh, like being too online or whatever when it comes to like awareness of like politics and stuff like that. But like like I mean, like these politics are rooted in like real things that like like they're rooted in real issues that impact people in different ways. And if the evangelicalism and stuff like that, that's at the heart of a lot of America's attitude towards, this conflict.
Yeah, and it's played a role in this nation's history as a whole, right? When it
Yeah.
comes down to everything from landing at Plymouth Rock to Manifest Destiny to colonizing the Philippines to basically Bush's conduct in Iraq, if you really want to extrapolate it that far, right?
Well, I mean, he straight up called it a crusade.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
really and it's so weird, where we've appropriated, and I mean, and that kind of goes back to with Reagan, where calling Russia an evil empire and stuff like that, applying this clear message of moral and therefore kind of just conflicts. Some of that's a little bit more recent history, but certainly it's rooted in a longer history of Manifest Destiny and all that stuff that's uses religious coding to sort of advance a largely imperialistic agenda.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing, right? So for Palestinians to recognize Aaron Bushnell as a martyr among their own it's heartbreaking, but it was a clear act of desperation for desperate times. And the point isn't to celebrate him, the point isn't to endorse him, the point is to do something, right?
Yeah.
And that's all it redounds to. I don't think we have to have. And that's the other thing too that I kind of hate about American political discourse is someone does something and the immediate question is, do you endorse this? Are you a fan of this? When everything is so much more complicated than I like X, Y, and Z,
Well, and then it's oh, well, you endorse this guy's thing, but did you know this guy happens to, some unsavory detail that has come out about his life since or something like that, right? I mean, that was literally the George Floyd stuff,
Yeah.
right? It was this guy's your martyr and stuff like that. And it's it has nothing. Well, not that it has nothing to do with the man himself, but it has a broader message behind it, right? That's what we're concerned with. That's what we're sort of endorsing or raising awareness of, right? It's not so much that the individual himself is a human deserves sort of basic decency. The actual details of their who they are and whatnot, that's not necessarily important to that conversation, but that's kind of what we boil it down to a lot of times.
Exactly. And the whole thing that gets missed with that kind of reductive thinking, or I don't even think it's reductive, I think it's intentionally hostile, right?
Right.
Is that
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, yeah, let's be clear, it is intentional.
exactly right? Is that the whole point of this is to examine what does it say about our society that an airman was driven to do this out of desperation, so that
Sure.
someone would do something. That's the question that needs to be asked.
And then it's someone from a background that you would not have expected that for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which probably makes it more powerful in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and that is what they want you to ignore. That is exactly what they want you to take out of your head. And with that being said, because this also just ties into the political climate, right? And this is a question that's kind of it's been making the rounds on social media. Maybe a couple commentators, a couple podcasters will bring it up. I don't see it brought that commonly in the mainstream, but maybe it is just worth asking, right? Is that what do you make of the take that with the way Israel has kind of forced the United States' hand post October 7th, why is this not considered a form of interference in the US election?
I don't know why that's not part of the broader discussion, because I mean, it 100% is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, it could barely be more transparent. Right? I mean, obviously, I mean, maybe the idea is well, the timing is not, totally perfect for the election to have a real impact necessarily, but I mean, it might, and it's clearly done, and I mean, and I feel there's not enough interrogation about why the Netanyahu government clearly would prefer Trump in office, right? I mean, you could certainly look at Trump's presidency to kind of,
Mm-hmm.
it's not it's a mystery, but I feel there's not a meaningful interrogation of that in the discourse. It's just kind of yeah, this is happening. But Biden is, yeah, and again, like his approach to it, it's either it's demonstrably bad from liberals who don't think we should be supporting Israel at all, in their assault on the Palestinians, and it's leftists probably more so than liberals. I think we do kind of underestimate how much I think the American public as a whole either is apathetic or doesn't understand how bad things are and why we
Yeah.
should change course. Or they just they just don't care. And there's that element to it as well. I mean, that's maybe a little under discussed as well. But you're right. Like it's like clearly kind of designed with. And again, though, it's like the to the extent that it's referenced that like, oh, maybe this is about like the election in any way, shape, or form. It's just like, well, like it's your fault for like getting like worked by them, right? Like it's like you're the one who's like sort of falling for it by objecting to our policy of supporting them and stuff like that, which is, I mean, idiotic.
Yeah, to say the least. Anyways, on the subject of idiotic, maybe let's get into the 2024 presidential primary. So let's start with the Republicans, maybe.
Sure. Yeah. So, since last time, we are down to two candidates. It is just Trump and Nikki Haley. Ron DeSantis dropped out right after he got second place in Iowa, which I had actually called. I said he was going to drop out and immediately endorse Trump before New Hampshire as like sort of like his political Hail Mary, right? That was going to put him back in Trump's good graces. He can sort of take credit for Trump beating Nikki Haley. And that race was actually a little tighter, so he could reasonably make that case. In Michigan itself, which Michigan had kind of a few interesting dynamics going on with this race, right? We had early voting for, I believe, 2 weeks prior to the election. I early voted. I think a lot of people probably did. I don't necessarily know the numbers. It'd be interesting if they release those. But we had that. This was the first state where you have a mix of. You basically just choose a ballot. You don't need to be a registered partisan to have access to either. So this is the first state where that was the case. You have a decent number of probably crossover voters, mostly voting for Nikki Haley on the Republican side. Maybe some Democratic crossover, but I doubt it because
I highly doubt it because
I don't.
I don't know if this is true, but can they find out if you voted in a Republican ballot if you crossed over?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's in the voter file. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I haven't looked at it in a minute, but I'm pretty sure that it shows that. I'm curious as to how many people like flip and whatnot, but also with the Republican side, you might notice as you're looking through the results, there was less delegates at stake because the RNC has a rule about when the primaries need to take place, and yeah, we'll get into like where those maps too. I think that'll be interesting to kind of look at where the support is for different things. But because Michigan went before March, the RNC penalized them and made less delegates at stake. So instead, most of their delegates are going to be determined at a partisan conference. I think this week or next, which is interesting as well because we have a interesting two-pope situation for the Michigan Republican Party chair. Where you have Pete Hoekstra, who is maybe a familiar name. He ran for Congress, notably, or he was in Congress. He ran for Senate against Debbie Stabenow, where he had.
And did he make that racist ad?
Yes,
right?
The very racist Super Bowl ad. Yes, the Debbie Spend It Now, with the like Asian music playing in the background and the Asian woman saying that you're giving us our money and whatnot. But yeah, so you have that. So that conference, and the reason that's interesting is you have the Pete Hoekstra wing of the Michigan Republican Party, which is, I guess, the official wing. But then you have their chair, who has refused to step down, Karamo. I can't remember. I think Christine Karamo. I think
so. Yeah.
and they are hosting competing conventions for the rest of those delegates. So we'll see what happens there. The Michigan Republican Party is an absolute mess. In terms of actual results, Trump won with 68%. Nikki Haley only got 26.6. Obviously, this is Trump's race at this point. But I think this speaks to the extent that a lot of hay is being made over of the proportion of uncommitted vote in the Democratic Party. Not a whole lot has been made of the fact that like Trump is still losing, close to 30% of the vote. Well, he lost 30% of the vote, but like 26% of it went to a specific candidate.
Yeah, so like in total it's 30%, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like you have like to me that's a bigger side of weakness than what Biden has. Not that there's maybe not causes for concern there, but not a lot of hay is made about that, right? That like you have, and surveys and polls keep coming out, reports that 50% of the like Nikki Haley voters said they will not vote for Trump and whatnot. So like clearly, as much as he has a hold over like the majority of his party, there's still a non-insignificant chunk that is like kind of lost and without a real rudder.
And also, do we have any data on voter turnout for this primary?
In terms of percentage, that's a good question.
Yeah, I guess we can maybe pull up. I'll just look up the state of Michigan because that's what I'm looking at right now.
I think it's a lot higher than I expected. Let's see.
Let's see. This is 2024, so I need 2020. Come through. Let's see. Okay. I don't think there was a primary in 2020 for the Republicans. Let's see though. Just looking at raw numbers, if Trump got 758,000 votes this year, he got 64.
And that's against no one, functionally.
Functionally no one, yeah. But I think, let's see, a total of how many votes? Okay, so we have like about 1 million reported votes right now. There were only 600.
And we've got 99% of the votes that are tallied in.
Yeah, so voter turnout is higher this year.
Yeah, that's kind of what I figured. It's also not as high on the Democratic side, but still pretty high.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think everyone was predicting the dropouts by January at that point. I don't really know what to make of Nikki Haley because like she just seems kind of hollow at this point, right? Like, it seems like a very Pyrrhic victory for her to be the number 2 candidate right now.
And I've had discussions about this with colleagues and stuff like that about like her role. For me, I feel like she's doing more long-term damage to her brand the longer she sticks in. Others disagree. They think that there's value to her sticking around. I think the issue is like her candidacy is like the most like vacuous lost thing I've ever seen. She's run on like kind of like this Clinton-esque like cynicism, right? Where like, Clinton in the 2016 primary was kind of like, well, like what Bernie wants is like unreasonable and stuff like that.
Well, we can't have nice things candidate, basically.
Yeah, and she's that for Republicans, right? Where it's like abortion, it's like, I'd love to outlaw abortion, but we can't do that, realistically and whatnot. And then like she's kind of the anti-Trump's quote unquote moderate candidate, but like when you like you only get like occasional real sharp criticisms of Trump. If you look at the ad that she was running here, it's mostly attacking Biden, but there's a few things that clearly apply to both, but she doesn't like explicitly name Trump. So she's not quite willing to be the anti-Trump candidate. She's not really moderate. She's a more committed conservative than Trump is. Just look at her reactions to the Alabama case that we're also going to get into is like sort of one of our major points on this episode too. So it's like you have this weird candidate who just doesn't like. She's like all things to no one, basically.
Yeah. I think that's about where we are with the Republicans. I think aside from that, Trump is still the most sued man in America and still can't post bail.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, he hasn't needed to yet, but yeah, I mean, it's not looking good for him.
And I know like the tendency is to like, be like, well, at least Trump is funny, but it just kind of stopped being funny at a point, not even in a you got to take it serious kind of way, but just like, he shows up with wet hair in like a hotel playing like Phantom of the Opera, and most people's like reaction is to laugh about it. To me, I'm just like, this is so fucking pathetic. Is this like, everyone had something to say about, is this your martyr? That's how I feel about Trump. Is like, this is your guy.
Yeah, for sure, right? And
Can't post bail.
I gotta give him some credit. He was at the border today giving a speech. A lot of it was just nonsense. And
They're not coming speaking. They're speaking other languages.
They're not speaking languages. I will give him some credit though. He did give this gem where he's come up with a nickname for Newsom, which is New Scum.
He's at the bottom of his game. I'm sorry. Trump had better ones in like 2020. This is wow.
I was like, it's admittedly, it's semi clever, but yeah, I mean that was like I did chuckle when I saw him just call him New Scum. I'm like, okay, like this. I mean, it's like playground childish as it is.
Yeah.
It was like it got a chuckle out of me, but it's like at the same time, it's like, yeah, like this is what you got. This is what you're bringing to the table.
Yeah, it seems like the Republicans are dead set on waving Trump in, and I think there's a lot of talk about the senility of Biden that I agree with, but I don't know. I think Trump is equally senile in some sense. Like, he might look sharp to somebody, but
yeah, and it's like I've seen the defenses. It's like, well, he's always been an idiot, but like at the same time, maybe isn't that like fundamentally the problem of someone being senile? Right,
right. It's like the appearance of sharpness is not the issue here. The issue is like, this guy would pop on a mic and like just like talk about random shit for like 30 minutes, an hour, which is what I'm doing right now. So there's that.
Well, and you look at the transcript of anything he says, and like we're talking like short snippets, right? Like I acknowledge that I might ramble on a bit longer sometimes too, but like in just the short snippets, if you read the transcripts of the things he's saying, he sounds like he's having a stroke.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
No coherence.
Just like the dying thoughts of as the DMT hits as you're dying kind of shit, right? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So, on the subject of senility, Mr. Joseph Robinette Brandon, stanky booty Biden.
Yeah.
Did you see the report that was out in the Daily Mail saying that he still fucks?
Yeah, the one where he said that the secret to a successful marriage is great sex or whatever.
I don't know, because like every regime has to have the North Korean propaganda lady, right? But this is just like, I'm sorry, who is this for? Like, okay, congrats, he can get it up, but like that has nothing to do with like his performance in other areas, right? As a matter of fact, he needs some blood to the brain right now.
Aren't you glad that at least everything downstairs is working?
I don't know. I think I'm less obsessed with like the alleged masculinity of my politicians and more of like, can they get something? I don't know what it is they plan to accomplish with that, because I still remember the 2020 primary, and I remember that there was a sizable and reasonable angle of Biden being presented as like he's very handsy, he's very gross, he's kind of rapey, and then to like kind of sweep all that under the rug, to then be like, oh dude, him and his wife have great sex, he's really fucking, and he tells everybody, he tells the aides, he tells visitors, You know,
Just probably a bit of role playing, you know.
you
It's
know, the article is unhinged. Like they were reviewing it on Chapo, and it was like apparently like when you
I didn't read the whole thing.
oh no,
I saw
it's
the
unhinged.
headline was good enough for me, but
The headline's bad enough, but like they're talking about like segments where he was trying to run in like I think it was 2012 or 26 or not in 2012. It must have been it must have been prior to that where he was thinking about running for president and Dr. Jill showed up like in a crop top and like wrote no on her like abdomen and he was like, "Well, I guess I'm not running this year." And it's just the kind of stuff where it's like I don't think I need to know this. I don't really, but it's especially gross when you know like all this stuff is going on in the administration. It appears very out of touch, and
well, in some ways, this is like really in touch with like the cultural moment, right? Like
I
we're in the
guess
era of like horny on Main. Like half of Blue Sky feels like it's sex workers. Half of Twitter feels like it's sex workers too. Half the
It-
time,
I mean, yeah,
like
that's what I think. Like, pussy is in bio at this point. I don't.
you know, I mean, like in some ways, is this like the most in touch Biden has been in his presidency?
I don't know. It's just very
He's in
unnerving
touch with something.
because there's that, and like I frankly don't care enough about Hunter Biden being a crackhead. You know, you had the special prosecutor say that yeah, Biden might have fucked up the documents, but we're not going to do anything about it. And it's the kind of thing where it's like you look at Biden enough, and it's like, okay, the old man's not 100% there. Why are we doing this rigmarole, right? None of us can say what's out in the open, you know?
Yeah, and there was an interesting discussion about this where it's like, you know, there's been kind of a push for like, hey, like maybe he should drop out, and like it's not going to make sense for him to drop out before the convention, where like, you know, we get democracy not exactly at work, where they just, you know, sort of go in the room and pick someone more or less.
Yeah.
Um, but like, I mean, you don't want him to like hand the nomination over to like, you know, Dean Phillips or something like that, right? Like, or I suppose Marianne is back in the race. Kind of like the height of unseriousness is jumping
Right.
back into the race that after you dropped out. But, um, gosh, I mean, there's yeah, and there's a lot going on there. I will say this too, because I've seen like Nate Silver kind of like get on the case of like, oh well, it's like the DNC's fault for like not making the rules like liberalized enough to like encourage other candidates to run. Like, what would that have accomplished? Right? You see what's on the counterfactual is there in your face on the Republican side, right? Other people ran, they embarrassed themselves. Trump didn't even like participate in the like nominating he hasn't even campaigned really, as far as I'm concerned. He didn't debate. He didn't. I mean, he's had a few events here and there, but they aren't like, you know, the normal. It's just the stuff that he's been doing since he was, you know, ran the first time and was president. It's not like traditional campaign style events. He's just kind of like, you know, he's showing up more in court than he is on the trail.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Nate Silver of all people wants to talk about, you know, the primary practices of the Democratic Party because
Right?
he didn't have a problem when they were all in the tank for Biden in 2020. He
No.
definitely didn't have a problem when they were in the tank for Hillary in 2016. So
He's there's something going on there. I think like he's kind of
he's got to reinvent his brand. I mean, there's only so many races you can call before like you get a couple wrong, right? But
yeah.
The whole point being, right, is like 2020 was the paradigm shift for the Democratic Party and to a certain extent what is the left of the American left, right? Which is Bernie tries to do something insurgent within the framework of electoral politics. I personally think now that he had a lot of bad advice. He had a lot of bad bedfellows on that campaign. And
I mean, there's some stuff too. Like, what was the book that I was reading? It was the Ryan Grimm book. It was on AOC primarily.
Okay.
The Squad, AOC, and the Hope of a Political Revolution. But he talks about the Sanders 2020 campaign a bit, and like you get the sense of like where like he was not surrounded by the best people, but also he had his own like just sort of bizarre proclivities that made him a less than perfect candidate. Like he didn't understand like fundamentally why you have like this big organization
Mm-hmm.
like doing a campaign, and so like they had to have like two HQs. They had like the real one and then like a fake one that they would take him to be like, oh yeah, like this is your campaign. It's like only, you know, the small number of staffers or whatever.
And that's the other thing about that campaign functionally, right? Is that even if there is like popularity for Bernie and his ideas, even if there is popularity for like something different,
His campaign workers threatened to go on strike at one point too.
right. It's like this machine is so badly run, it cannot take that energy and, you know, run with
Yeah.
it. It was not able to do that. So, you know, they get what they get the outcome they want. They put Bernie in the DNC cuck chair, and that's where we are today.
Yeah, kind of.
I mean, of course, forgive my analogy there, but like,
I mean, to be fair, I mean, like, I think there's been some like real substantive gains on things that were closer to like Bernie proposals and whatnot
to some extent,
since
yeah.
then. And like, I think, you know, at least rhetorically, Biden is to the left of, you know, most politicians were in 16 and whatnot. So like, I mean, he's won in some like it's like he's almost martyred himself in some ways.
And I think that's the thing, right? Is like, was that an effective calculus? And we are still examining the results of that, but for my money, no. But the question remains, what was left to do?
Sure.
So,
and I mean, and always, you know, you're always going to run into that issue when you use terms like revolution and whatnot. I mean, that implies the kind of sweeping changes that are probably unlikely to happen in a short period of time.
Yeah, and it's also like the challenge of that project was, can you get enough people registered to vote and in line to show up at the primaries to get you across the finish line? And there was a variety of factors in that. You have, you know, the Pete Buttigieg fuckery, you've got the pandemic, you've got a bunch of things happened, right? In addition to bad staffing and bad management, but that's what happened. That is what happened. And, you know, when we examine the history of the left, you know, I stand with it ideologically, but it's maturity to admit failure, right? And that's what happened. Yeah. So, you know, if it's like, how did we get here? Well, that's how Biden got in, right? Everyone is surprised that the DNC does fuckery, but how could you not have predicted something like that in 2020? Come on. So anyways, with that, right? So even in the Democratic race now, right, is that everyone seems to be in the tank for Biden, even if Biden isn't in the tank for himself. Marianne is somehow still on the ballot for whatever reason. Dean Phillips was I'm going to be very honest with you. Maybe I should have been paying attention to this guy, but the first time I saw his name was like on the what is on my ballot Google search, to be completely honest with you. And I'm like, who the fuck is Dean Phillips?
Before, but I never really delved into him, to be fair. He has been in Congress for what looks like 5 years. Yeah, 5 years at this point. So 2.5 terms.
Yeah.
He had he's a former president CEO of a company, stepped aside to run other investments. He's basically kind of like running to Biden's right to sort of drag back in, like, you know, your Chamber of Commerce folks and stuff
basically,
like that.
Yeah. And it's like his business portfolio is really fucking weird. Like it was his dad's like liquor business. Former co-owner of like Talenti Gelato. So if you've seen that gelato in like the little plastic cups that cost $10, that's him. And then like a coffee chain in the Twin Cities, I think.
Yeah, apparently it's enough to make him one of the wealthiest members of Congress.
He saw Dorelisa and is like, I gotta try that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he also just looks so fucking. That's a.
He kind of looks like a video game NPC.
Yeah, he looks like the Minecraft villager if he like ran for Congress.
I can't unsee it now. And what's funny is, so Marianne she had dropped out prior to Michigan, right? After Michigan, she says, I'm back in the race. Maybe it was the fact that she got 2,000 more votes than Dean Phillips, who was still in the race. I don't like.
He lost to uncommitted though. That's what I don't get.
Both of them have lost to uncommitted. Both had 2 to 3% of the vote. Not great. Uncommitted gets 13% of the vote. Biden gets 81.1% of the vote. Obviously, the story here, right, is the uncommitted, right? Uncommitted gets over 100,000 votes, just over 100,000.
And the target of the Listen to Michigan campaign, mind you, was 10,000. That was because of the margin in 2016 or so, right? So
yeah, and to be fair, I mean, like if 10,000 was the margin for, like, I think it was Obama in 12.
Okay.
If that's the margin, that was setting the bar like far too low of like that's not even like meaningful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Getting 100,000 of that is pretty meaningful, right? Yes, Biden wins by 81%, which again, that's way better than Trump did in his own primary.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the story, like if you can look at where the vote share is on that map, I don't know if it's going to show up.
Yeah, I mean, the map is pretty much overwhelmingly in the tank for Biden, but I mean, let's just go down by county, right? So like
where uncommitted did best is important.
Yeah, so Wayne County, so that's like the heaviest, minority voting blocks in the state, I'd say. Washtenaw, which is again Ann Arbor, Ypsi, so like the college towns.
Yep.
I'd say that, and then even like Kalamazoo is also a higher one. Kent, so that's Flint.
Mm-hmm.
Houghton County, that's like uncommitted is not necessarily unsizable. I think a lot of people.
Where it's big, right, is like, so obviously Dearborn was the Muslim community, the America's jihad capital, according to, I think, was it the New York Times that posted that atrocious headline?
Yeah.
So obviously you have their Muslim majority. They're against it. It also did really well among Gen Z, particularly college people. That's probably where there's, and again, like I think that's the voter demographic that already kind of feels disaffected by the Biden administration for other reasons as well, right? You obviously have, student loans and stuff like that. I mean, you can, the Supreme Court obviously played a role, but like, there's other things with that as well that, maybe Biden should have just gone for a more enthusiastic and bold approach, even like knowing that it would probably get repealed. Right, that just kind of going all in might have been at least a little bit more attractive. But those are the voters where it's like you're not concerned that like, oh hey, yeah, Gen Z is going to turn out for Trump in a big way in 2024, but you are concerned they might not turn out for Biden. At least that's sort of my take for like the Biden campaign, right? It's like that's a meaningful signal, right? The Muslim community, that's a meaningful signal too, but like probably a predictable one under the circumstances. And you can kind of, cross your fingers and hope that things circumstantially change before then. We'll see how much they do. I mean, we're approaching at least a temporary ceasefire in theory. It's possible after today's events and maybe, God forbid, any more atrocious events, that you might see a real reassessment of a lot of that policy towards Israel. Just sort of the political demands of it, but like those are kind of like the electoral weaknesses that I think are kind of being displayed here on the Democratic side. I don't think they're quite as pronounced as Trump's weaknesses, but they're there nonetheless.
Yeah, and it also goes to show, right, that this principle of you owe your vote to the Democrats if you we're a loyal contingent at any point to them electorally, right? It's been refuted at this point, I would argue.
Well, and let's be clear, right? This is not the general election.
Exactly.
This is like the idea, like, and that's probably where it bothers me more, right? Than just like your vote. They're entitled to your vote, whether they give you anything that you want or not. Like, and I've seen people say like, "Oh, you're a spoiled child for like wanting things." I mean, I get like, hey, yeah, like this person has given you some things that are materially better, but that isn't meeting all of your needs. Okay, fair enough. Right, there's sort of like an argument to be had there that like in my opinion at least, I would calculate sort of the overall assessment there. But like this is a primary, right? This is there exclusively to voice what your thoughts are within the party. Why, like, what is so wrong about like giving out a protest vote and stuff like that? Right.
Right.
And I mean, and I think it speaks volumes, right? That it was uncommitted. It wasn't Marianne or Dean because they're jokes.
Right.
It was like, this is like something where it's like, these are people trying to speak to Biden, right? This is like, hey, we are, we're hurt. We want to see a change on this policy direction and whatnot. This is sort of the calling out for help, right? And like no one's confusing what this uncommitted vote means and whatnot, right? I mean, if it was 10,000 votes, then yeah, sure. Like if it just meets sort of parity with what Obama got, where there was no meaningful movement, yeah, I would say that's like fair enough. That means nothing. But 100,000, you can't ignore that.
They're gonna try to. That's my bet. Is like I think they're just trying to dismiss and
Yeah, I mean that very well might happen. And I think there's a lot of peril to doing that.
Exactly. Like thus Michigan spoke, and I think like whoever is trying to do that dismissive, how dare you, when if you do this, Trump will win bullshit. Like, I'm sorry. Like, let's just even start maybe prior to October 7th, right? Is that Biden has done nothing to show people that he's doing the job he says he's doing. Okay, like this idea that voters do not have to be given anything materially for their support is fizzling at a time of like real economic distress for people, right? So if people aren't asking for a handout, they are asking for relief. They're just asking for a chance to breathe, right? They're not even getting that.
Well, and even the things that he has done to improve things on that front, as you said, they're not conveying that.
Exactly.
And like just the idea that like, oh, it's not his job to tell you what he's doing to improve the country. Like the fact that it's not his job to make things better. It's not his job to tell you how he has made things better. Is just there's that like, I mean, I don't like to use that term like blue MAGA or whatever for those groups.
Yeah.
But like I get the parallels, right? Where they do not like it's like this. There's a reason why you worship people in office and you are not running for office yourself, or have not successfully run for office yourself. It's because you do not understand like anything about like the purpose of democracy.
Exactly. And it's like I don't understand this idea of it's not his job to explain it. I'm sorry, like isn't the whole point of franking privilege just in general that you get to tell people in your district what you got up to?
More or less, yeah.
Right. So it's like
I'm sure it had some like less cynical purpose when it was
created. I know.
But that is fundamentally what it is, yeah.
Right. So it's like what is with this level of like democratic hero worship at this point, right? Where like the idea of politics as something rudimentary and Machiavellian is haram, right? And you kind of see this even with like not just Biden not conveying his W's properly, right? But even like in the early days of his term and at certain points in his administration, right? Like Democratic governors have kind of been left in the lurch by the presidential administration, and they've had to take matters into their own hands. And we've all seen the memes of like Midwest Democratic governors with a 1 vote margin, and like they'll be like made equated to Lenin in those memes or whatever, right? But it's like, you're reaching a point where like a state governor says, "Fuck it, I don't need the president's support. I'll just do it myself," right?
Yeah.
How that's why people are in the state they're in, right? It's if you look at the people who chose to go uncommitted in this Michigan primary, right? You'd probably find people who are already supporters of Whitmer and supporters of like figures in Whitmer's administration, right? Because they did the groundwork of actually winning people over in the state, right? Even if Whitmer herself is trying to be a surrogate for Biden. So it's just kind of goes to show that like.
Well, and I think, one of the selling points they were using when they were organizing this too was that like they were like, and I know it sounds like weird where they're like, oh, like, well, by doing this, we're actually going to like help Biden in the general. By sending this message to like course correct now, which is like, I mean, I know that sounds a little hokey, but like, I think that is like part of the selling point, right?
Right.
That there is that like persuasive angle there.
And that was the whole point of the uncommitted campaign, right? Is like, okay, not all of us are going to do illegalist action. Understandably, we shouldn't, right? Not all of us can make a big statement with self-immolation. We probably shouldn't, right? But if you're
we're not
going
gonna put out an open endorsement for that on the show.
I kind of said I wasn't going to, right? But it's like that's what I was trying to say, right? Is like, Adam, it's not for me to make an endorsement. The question is like, our society drove him to do it, right? That's where I stand on that. But it's the same thing, right? Where it's like, if all people can do is what they have in front of them that doesn't put them in jeopardy and is within the confines of the system, voting uncommitted is your only recourse. In the same way, like, if BDS is your only recourse, then boycott is probably the only thing you have at the individual consumer level, right? Mm-hmm. So why are we punishing people for engaging in the process? Why are we allergic to diagnosing power as like the capital by which politics operates? I don't know where this arises, but if you can't fucking understand that, you're not going to make it.
Yeah. Like, I mean, that is really, kind of what it is at the end of the day. It's just like, and I don't know how widespread that is. I mean, it's obviously a lot of part of the online discourse. And as I said, I think anecdotally, I interact with a ton of people like that, but we really need to move on from that mentality as a culture if we really want like any positive change in this country.
Exactly. And it's, again, if you're mad at people for voting undecided and you decided to, I mean, I voted undecided, I'll admit that, right? Is like, I don't feel the need to pressure anybody to vote the way I do. I don't feel compelled to, endorse my choice in an election as the true right thing to do. But if you're getting this worked up about a legal and valid option that someone took within the system you make them participate in, what does that say about your politics? That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
If you cannot get people to vote for Biden with this like bullshit, and you have to resort to like beating people over the head, and it still doesn't work, that says a lot more about your politics than it does about mine. And it's not about me. It's not about anyone who voted uncommitted. It's the principle at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyhow. Okay, so leaving the Listen to Michigan campaign aside, in what feels, like another cyclical repeat of the past 2 years or so, as Republicans seem to be able to get not a damn thing done for anybody, they've also decided to ratchet the culture war up another degree. And, I'm not going to say it was better in the past couple of years, right? But there was at least like something that made sense where it's like, okay, you guys are misogynist, so you're just going to roll back abortion rights. Okay. you guys hate trans people, so you're gonna just make trans people's lives a miserable hell. Okay. What the fuck is going on with this Alabama IVF shit? I don't fucking get it. It escapes all like logical explanations of like desires or motives. It doesn't make sense.
Well, I mean, it's fundamentally tied to just sort of kind of everything that's going on, right? I mean, it's tied to like that root basic religious fundamentalist attitude within the party that has kind of become the collective whole of it, right? At this point, I think, no one's going to object to that characterization of the party. And I mean, you see, like, I mean, was it Michael Knowles had said something about like IVF is the equivalent of a rape baby, anyways, which is absurd. But so the Alabama Supreme Court, for background, right, ruled that frozen fetuses count as children. This, of course, largely means that IVF is illegal functionally in that state. Or it's this legal like gray area at the very least, right? Where because in vitro pregnancies have pretty high rates of failure, like just for like the fetus to like take, or the embryo to take, you have a higher rate of failure, which means by law then the procedure performing it that caused this thing to die would potentially constitute itself as an abortion, which is illegal in the state. So that's kind of what the issue that they're at now. There's been some scrambling to sort of clarify that in law. Some of those things are done where it's like, oh, well, we'll make it legal through November, conveniently enough. So you'll have to, like, what a weird sunset, right? Let's just sunset it right after the election. Largely because they recognize that this is like an electorally bad issue, right? Like, my guess is that the average citizen has fought very little of IVF on their daily basis, but ever since this case came out, right, it's been all kinds of stuff, right? And I think fundamentally we're hitting this point where I think people don't really like, frankly, religious nuts telling them what they can and can't do. Right. That's why there's the objections to, sort of their, banning abortion and whatnot. It's why there's an objection to this. Right. This is sort of just like an extra, like, kind of fringe case and whatnot. But it's something that is just ridiculous. Right. Like, yeah, there's people who kind of think these are like, this is ungodly procedure, which is. I mean, I'm not going to get into that. That's all that stuff I find kind of nuts, but that's where we're at with Alabama and IVF, and it's sparked a whole national discourse, of course, and all that.
I just don't understand how the evangelical movement has just decided to histrionically set its priority perspectives and its priority agendas based on crude, ill-informed, and very obviously male-centric perspectives of the reproductive process for human beings, right? And it's just like in the pursuit of defending hypothetical children, there are children right now who fucking need the American government's help. Mm-hmm. If Raphael Warnock is on the Senate floor talking about injured children with no living relatives in Gaza, and you don't care about them, okay. What about children in the United States who are actually going hungry right now? What about
America first, right?
Right. What about children who are, because of these fucking bullshit new child labor laws, are working like 12-hour shifts in meat planting or meat packing plants, right? Like, what the fuck is going on? How is that permissible as a society? But the hypothetical child that could exist from whatever medical procedure they realize they're shocked by today, that must be protected. That is sacrosanct. But any child, like, I mean, it's such a trite point to bring up because we always bring this up, right? But What the fuck is this?
Part of me almost believes it's just like their internal masochism, right? It's like what kind of weird it just feels like this pursuit of what kind of losing culture or position can we take that might potentially harm us electorally, and let's just go all in on it for no reason other than just to maximize harm to groups of people who I, I mean, yeah, like you're right. It's kind of unfathomable why is even if you had a particular distaste for this type of thing, why are you why is this your priority? Right? There's
It,
nothing else you can think of that would be that would take precedence over this or anything else like that, where it's like, hey, yeah, I don't really like in vitro pregnancies. I think they're an affront to God or whatever, but so is, children is working in the mines or, whatever else. It's just there's just no concern about any of that. It's just purely just whatever the window for opportunity is. And obviously the judiciary at this point, I mean, is so compromised up and down the you know the bench, as it were, and you're gonna get people who they don't have to worry about elections and whatnot, so they're just gonna use you know the rough framework of whatever constitution, whether it's the U.S. Constitution, the state constitution that they want to run with, and just you know whatever interpretation they can muster on it, that'll be what they run with, and there's little to no consequences that they can face.
and it's especially weird that the right wing with its obsession with birth rates, with family values and all this shit, right?
Yeah.
IVF exists as a procedure to help people who have had trouble conceiving, right? Of course, there's a
Yeah.
bunch of weirdos involved with the whole thing, but the average
And
consumer
there's
of
the
the service,
surrogacy
right?
questions
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And I know that's kind of become a touchier subject, kind of across the political spectrum recently.
Mm. But that's what I'm saying is it's never out of any genuine
Yeah.
question or genuine concern for real people involved with this, right? Or with real people who will be affected by this. This is they sought out a surgery video, complained that they saw gore, and now are just damn, that's crazy. I got to do something about it. But it's this is just such a weird thing. And you know what this also redounds to, right? Is there was a weird I forget which conservative media weirdo was dating Sofia Vergara at the time, but then because of the fallout in the relationship, he tried to get custody of her eggs that she froze for IVF or whatever, right? And I'm just wondering, is this some weird patriarchal thing where you want to, because if it all redounds to property rights, right? Are you trying to set it such that a woman's genetic material could be owned by a man? Is that the incentive here? Is it by determining, genetic materials as owned by somebody? Does that change?
Well, does that require you determine that it's a child to necessarily get there either?
I don't know. Is it a divorced dad conspiracy? I'm just spitballing here, right? I don't think. Of course, that's ridiculous, but it's there is no logical fucking basis for any of this. There's no fucking. I'm gonna be frank. This is not a fucking issue that anyone should care about. But because these guys have made it their touchstone, because they made it their bread and butter, and because they've set it histrionically as a policy objective, they can now drag people with more mundane links to this into the open of this process and wreak havoc on their lives as a result.
Yeah, for sure. And it's one of those things too where, as you were kind of alluding to, you have an issue that is not super important in terms of like, how it impacts the majority of people, but it can impact some people, and in a huge way, in a way that's largely inconvenient. And I don't like, and to me, it's like, what is like the full like legal theory of this, right? If those are kids, does like you're not actually fertilizing them, like you just have like the frozen embryo, but you're not actually incubating it, is that a crime?
Yeah,
Just
it's like
keeping a child frozen
it's kind
by
of
that,
like
like that's kind of this weird thing. And again, it's like it's probably someone who has no probably medical knowledge of what goes on behind this. And it creates like these weird holes where it's like, well, like what does that mean? And it also further demonstrates, right, where it's like and I feel like the right wing like legal types are like some of like just like fundamentally the most dishonest people in
yeah,
like the entire right wing circle, right? Where they're like, oh well, like we would never come for like those rights or whatever, but then they do,
yeah.
right? They like, oh, we would never do this, and then like, especially in this current judicial environment, they're like, oh yeah, next week we're totally going to like gut like this thing that we blatantly told you we will not do, right? It's just so much dishonesty where it's like, at least out of someone like a Matt Gaetz, where he stands on these issues. These like crazy podcasters, where they stand on these issues. The
Mhm.
fact that they're all, oh yeah, let's repeal like no fault divorce. These people will do the exact same thing, but they'll like lie to you about it and say they have no interest in doing that.
Yeah, and it's just it feels like we are stuck as a society babysitting these guys for their existential crisis. The hypothesis of some stereotypical or some hypothetical soul gaining consciousness at fertilization and then like that life being snuffed out is harmful to their being, and now because they're freaking out, they're lashing out, and like we have to basically deal with their freak out, right? But I don't know, like now we're just speculating wildly, right? But it's like
Well, I mean, I think that's actually a decent. We can transition if you want from there, but like I was thinking, especially with Mitch McConnell stepping down from leadership,
yeah, yeah.
and there was like this discussion about like, oh, that's gonna like let the floodgates into like the real crazies, and it's like fundamentally conservatives in this country have treated like politics like an active hostage situation for years at this point,
Mhm.
right? Like it's their temper tantrums, like you were saying, where it's like, oh well, like we like we're gonna do this and like just whatever, like this is we're upset about this, we're gonna do it and you're gonna reap the consequences of it. And the same thing, right, where it's like, oh well, like Mitch McConnell was our babysitter, now we're gonna be real crazy, and it's your fault somehow because of that. And like I mean, it's like it's always like a constant state of like victimhood and like let's just be crazy and like threaten to be even crazier if we don't get the crazy things that we want.
Exactly. It's like I don't know. Part of me was even going to speculate on like, is this tied to like my cultural observation that like Americans have a bizarre relationship to their own mortality? But I think let's maybe deviate from that and just like you said, if Mitch McConnell as like a shrewd Machiavellian actor is all that was holding the floodgates of insanity back, what does that say about your political project? What does that say about your political movement? And writ largely, like, what does it say about the culture war other than even if the serious neoliberals and anti-communists that used to head the thing were using it as cover or as a distraction for the masses, the lunatics run the asylum. And I'm sorry if
Yeah.
that's ableist, but like you get what I'm saying, right? That like you let these true believers run the shop, and then when your Bismarck characters die, who's left in the Reichstag? It's Hitler at the end of the day, right? That's to put it bluntly. To put it bluntly.
Yeah, and like I mean, and it's crazy where like they don't. it's like there's that like unwillingness to recognize that they are, like that they could be in any way at fault for that, right? That like, yeah, like we've allowed the lunatics to run the asylum, but it's like somehow like it's the liberals' fault or whatever. And like, let's face it, with Mitch McConnell, I mean, I know there's sort of like we're already starting to get a little bit of that rehabilitation with like, oh hey, this was like the one sane man or whatever. But let's face it, right? Like this is someone who did like so much damage to the system, and maybe more damage than a true believer would. Virtue of the
Right.
fact that he knew how the system worked and whatnot. And I don't think we're going to delve into like the whole scope of his legacy today. I mean, that's going to be probably like another Feinstein-esque episode, except the question's not
Probably.
going to be, was he bad? It's like, how bad was he exactly is going to be the real question.
That's actually a great idea. Let's do that soon.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, it's just, I mean, not just with like the culture war being like completely in a bizarre state of entropy, but with Mitch McConnell stepping down and like that opening the floodgates. Let's also just talk about like this perpetual budget crisis that seems to be happening now, right? Where it previously was going on for funding for Ukraine. Funding for Israel was tied to this deal as well. Even you had
Border.
the border. You had the Democrats like run to the right for the border,
Yeah.
thinking that was going to trick the Republicans, and that didn't work. So it's like we're just
And
always on the verge of government shutdown at this
part of
point.
me also kind of wonders if that's like sort of meeting the cultural moment too. I think that there has been a real rightward shift in this country on immigration, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's been the consequence of the. I mean, the one of the problems with the pandemic is like that was a complete breakdown of consensus reality, right?
Yeah.
But people have just taken on this bizarre like I see fucked up shit that's also very visibly fake on the internet every day, and the real format as it exists like makes it easier to boof that kind of fear-oriented content. And now you
Yeah.
just have people who are convinced that like inner cities are crime ridden, teeming with homeless people, and you will get robbed for everything you own if you like step into an urban area, that the border is teeming with MS-13 or whatever, and that every foreign country is full of like anti-American elements out to get you, and your little slice of suburban haven is
Is number one on their target list.
yeah, it's like you you as a lawnmower production assistant in Natoma, Kansas, will get your mug root beer robbed by the barbarians at the gate. That's exactly
Yeah.
what's
I
going to
mean,
happen.
we don't talk enough about that other plane that was hijacked on 9/11 that was going after your home.
Oh my gosh. Oh my god. But like that's what I'm saying, right? It's like the politics of fear is really all that exists today. And like, even I was talking when we had Professor Yazdiha on 2 episodes ago, like we even talked about like how in with this Israel and Palestine stuff, like you have Jewish Americans talking about how they don't want this done in their name. And then you have Biden turning around and saying Jews aren't even safe in the United States. They're only safe in Israel.
Yeah, I mean,
What kind
basically.
of future are we offering to people in this country? What is this?
And it's, again, I mean, maybe that's kind of the real product of like the age thing. Is just that like there were just certain like beliefs that were instilled in that generation about certain things, and people don't adapt very well, regardless of their age, right? But like, you're not gonna when you're set in your ways, it's really hard to change.
I
Um,
suppose so. And it's like, I don't know. I was saying earlier that like if Americans have a problem culturally reconciling with mortality, as we talk about the death of the American empire, is this advanced political psychosis a consequence of that? I don't know.
it could be, yeah. But yeah, I guess to kind of get at your point though, of like the the budget and all that stuff too. It's like it's weird where there's sort of credit that's given to McConnell for like helping facilitate some of these things. At the same time, it's like we've been in this kind of perpetual cycle of crisis for almost his entire reign as like the top Republican in the Senate.
Mhm.
Right? It's like it goes back to at least him and Harry Reid, just sort of like waiting for like, shut down windows to actually open up before they actually, would act on things. And that's just become like, the Machiavellian sane man in the room is what's created the system of chaos already. And like, like just letting it organically occur. I would almost trust that there's more likely to be just some randos in the Senate who might be more cooperative with the agenda than a proper leader, right? I mean, if you look at what's happened in the House, obviously, like, yeah, it's completely, paralyzed, which is maybe shocking considering how easy it is to do things when you're in the majority of the House, but
Yeah,
clearly they found a way to fuck that up.
they did, and I think that's like the defining characteristic of Mike Johnson's tenure as speaker so far is that not a damn thing seems to be able to get done other than these like Hunter Biden dick pic hearings or whatever.
I mean, even the things of like bipartisan support are failing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because he is like that. Maybe it's not entirely his fault. It's probably a decent chunk his, but it's like they're just not. He's not someone who's capable of leading that caucus. It's possible that caucus just can't be led. Because they did succeed with the impeachment of Mayorkas, right? I mean, that's going to go to the Senate for a trial, but again, it's like I think, Benghazi was relatively transparent when they were doing those hearings for Clinton that like, okay, this was the objective, was to, besmirch Hillary and whatnot. But man, it has like the Hunter Biden one, the Mayorkas one, these feel like parodies of congressional procedure.
It's like I don't know, like you want anti-corruption and exposure of like abuse of power to be adequately dealt with by your government if you consider it competent, right? But like,
Right.
if this is the only focus of those efforts and like the people leading those charges are cartoonishly corrupt in their own rights, like what are we doing? What are we fucking doing? Like I don't care if Hunter Biden has to be sealed at the bottom of a mountain for 1,000 years for his crimes. I don't care. But like, what are you doing in addition to everything else? Not a damn thing.
Yeah.
And
that is really what's coming down to, right? It's like there's no focus on the actual like operations of government. It's all focused on sort of the scandalization of things. It doesn't help that you have like, Comer has got to be one of the dumbest members of Congress. Just hearing him talk about like these hearings and whatnot, it's like this guy he hasn't lost the plot because he never had like a remote grasp of the plot. He didn't even understand like the side plot in chapter 1 or whatever. He has there's nothing going on upstairs for him.
It makes me wonder, like, what is the agenda of the right at this point, other than like misery and coming up the works? Because, I don't know, like even Trump, like what's his end game with this? What is he gonna get? Power used to be a thing you sought to accomplish a goal. Now it's like I don't even think like hoarding power is a goal that people have realistically in this current order anymore. And even with like Greg Abbott's bullshit with the border, like if you look at Abbott and like the Texas border and how that has gone his entire gubernatorial tenure, yeah, like what is he trying to do with like outsourcing private security to like the next batch of like guys to get arrested for January 6th style shenanigans.
Right.
Like, okay, you prove that you're willing to deputize like car dealership salesmen to commit crimes against like federal agents. For what? What do you gain? The cruelty is the point. I get it, but like, is that all?
I mean, maybe he's got White House goals. It's impossible to fathom him getting anywhere close to that position, but like, he's not, he's not totally the top rung of the ladder. But yeah, I mean, but even then, right? It's for the people who are closer to there. It's like it doesn't seem like. It seems like the ego boost is what's important more so than actual like tangible consequences other than maybe cruelty, as you said. I don't know, maybe they're when they talk to God at night or when they're about to become speaker apparently, maybe he tells them like this is what needs to be done to like I don't know.
It's that's what I'm saying is like there's no. I mean, even speaking as a Marxist, right, where it's like they do all of this to uphold capitalism. They do this to ensure that the machine is well oiled and runs smoothly, so they can extract super profits, right? That's fine and handy, but like it doesn't even seem like they're getting anything out of that anymore.
Well, I mean, yeah, like that assumes some basic incentives for that structure to be upheld.
Yeah,
right. Like, and it's like there's I don't know. I mean, like we've kind of moved into like this like weird phase of our culture where like ideologies have really kind of become, in some ways, maybe a substitute or at least a supplement to religion, and
fair.
in ways that I think are just like deeply unconstructive, right? Where it's like just the idea of like where you talk to your libertarian types, especially where it's like, I mean, granted they're kind of hypocrites on other issues, but like when it comes to like the idea of like freedoms and stuff like that, they're willing to like make some really bizarre sacrifices, at least rhetorically. They're willing to do that to secure whatever like that like maximalist freedom approach looks like and things like that. I mean, where it's just like, oh, free markets, well that means like any type of regulation's bad. Like, oh well, what about like should companies not be able to poison water? It's like, well, it's their right to do so. So yeah, if they if they want to do that, that's their form of expression or whatever. So it's like just a really like I think that's kind of like a big product of it. It's just sort of like buying their own supply.
Yeah, it's almost like I don't know. I need to read the book Voltaire's Bastards because it does highlight how like modern American libertarians have like bastardized and really turned like these old like European Enlightenment ideas into like bullshit, right? But as you said all that, like I'm just thinking like the Enlightenment ideals you have even ceased to be believed in, right? There's any idea of like the state using its capacities towards any good end, that human life can be anything fulfilling for anybody, that a better world is possible even for some people.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the rule they've foreclosed that possibility even for themselves. It's just a song and dance. Like I get that a lot of people hate their fucking jobs, but like dude, you were a fucking member of Congress. If you don't want it, resign and get somebody else in the seat if you don't want it. Like what are you doing showing up?
Most of them can make a lot more doing something else.
Right. So it's like what is going on here? What I just is it just like just keep the wheels like spinning until everything blows up? I hope it's not that. It shouldn't be that, but that's what it looks like to me.
I mean, it does feel like there's some fundamental nihilism at the heart of everything.
Exactly. And it's like I don't know. It's like it feels trite to say this, and we've said similar things in the past before, but it's like this is just an anti-human ideology at a point. This is so antithetical to the human condition. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So I don't know, like just being a human being who says, "Hey, this fucking sucks," is probably a step in the right direction. Is it praxis? I don't know.
I mean, when you just sort of like buy into like that form of nihilism, right? Just like this sucks. Just I'm not gonna do anything about it. Not gonna care.
I mean,
Like that's probably maybe not the solution, but
and the question is always out there, right? It's like, so what do we do? Especially like, what can we do within the system? What can we
Mhm.
do that doesn't get people thrown out on the street or like, incarcerated in mass for resisting the system? That is the
Right.
question of the hour, right? But I think it is a mark of maturity and a real sign of political consciousness to know if someone's pissing on you and calls it rain, that's probably a bad thing.
Yeah.
And if you can't identify that, you're not gonna make it. So, in summary, greenhouse mindset has been upheld in this episode. It remains to be upheld in all future episodes, right? That being said, what can we reasonably expect moving forward? Not in terms of the podcast, but like with future events. What trends do you foresee in the primary, maybe in just the next month?
On the primary, I mean, Nikki Haley said she's gonna drop out. Well, she said she won't drop out until she's mathematically eliminated on Super Tuesday. So presumably that means she will probably drop out Super Tuesday.
Hmm.
You're gonna see that consolidate. It's possible she might just stick in just for the heck of it. I mean, she's losing money. Um, most of her donors are leaving her and whatnot. I guess they're not quite willing to just throw money down the drain, at least in that capacity. Um, as far as the Democratic primary, I mean, that's largely a settled issue. It'll be worth kind of seeing how Biden chooses to respond to the further calls for ceasefire and stuff like that, um, and kind of how that plays out. Like it's sort of are there political repercussions for that? Because I think the way he has opted to thread that needle between people who are and the thing is, it's like most people that are supportive of Israel are not supportive of what they're doing. And I think that's been like also just completely lost in that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's worth like if does Biden come to that epiphany too that like it's not necessarily an electoral loser to not exactly abandon an ally, but at least curb their worst impulses.
Exactly. And that's really what it is, right? Is we are in a way, praying for Biden to make the right choice. That is the state of the American elector. That is the state of the American citizen, especially in regards to American foreign policy.
And in some ways, right? I mean, the unfortunate things is that like he only has so much influence over what Israel does,
Exactly.
right? So it's like there's certain things where like he can voice support. I mean, at the very least, I think if not vetoing certain things in the UN anymore might help and whatnot. But we'll see how long it takes before we get there.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I don't know if this is relevant to today's events at all, but you remember that really bad storm we had this January?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, you had power lines going out, the roads were way
Yeah.
too bad to drive, so I'm trying to get home in the middle of this storm. I made the bad choice of trying to leave in the middle of it. and I'm trying to get back to my place, and I have this stupid ass idea to try and cut through a neighborhood to get to another main road. Worst decision you can make in a snowstorm. Just stay on a main road.
Yeah.
And the roads are pretty scary at this point. I'm trying to go uphill. People are slipping. People can't get traction. You know, there's a weird trick where if you try to pulse the gas, you will get some traction, but it's tricky. It's scary. And I get cut off by an Amazon truck in this neighborhood, and I fall into a snowbank. And a couple strangers see me. There's a postman in the mix. They help me get out. And they send me, they give me their best wishes, say it's no problem, wish me on my way. And everyone goes their separate ways in the middle of that storm, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot about that moment this year, right? Nobody had to do that. But they did.
Yeah.
And that's what solidarity is to me. That's what human perseverance, human kindness.
Well, and that's such a basic expression of it too.
Exactly. And that's, I don't know, I told a friend about that, and he was like, damn, even in America today, you still see it, So there's still bits and pieces of what makes humanity good, even in Biden's America, right? And that is the optimistic note I choose to leave this show on today, is that if you see people struggling and it's in your power to help, don't be like Biden. Don't be like those in power who have all the means to help and don't take it. Do what you can. It might just be enough. Because I was able to make it home that night. And I don't know what would have happened if those people weren't there to help me.
That's great.
So that is my benediction. That is my best wish for everybody on our 100th episode. Thanks again to everybody who's helped out with this project. Shout out to you, Josh, as always. Sky and John, even though they're not here on this episode. All of our guests. Everyone who supported the show. Everyone who's encouraged us to keep going with this. I was worried for a minute just because how busy I got this year that I wouldn't be able to keep this going, but Greenhouse Gaslighting is still free. We're still on air, and we intend to be here. So, to 100 more episodes.
To 100 more.
All right. Josh, do you have anything else you want to leave the listeners with, or anything you'd like to plug?
No, not today. I don't have any inspiring little anecdotes to send us off on either, unfortunately.
Listen, you gave us plenty of pearls of wisdom today, so that's all I can ask for. So,
all right.
Yeah, I got the links to what social media we have left in the show description, as well as our link tree and the show archive. A very small housekeeping announcement. We'll still keep the show on YouTube, but I have the ability to keep the RSS Universal on YouTube now, so the YouTube videos will basically just look like a big podcast play button at this point. So it should still work, I think, but from this episode onwards, it's just going to be a cut and dry, simple graphic. Don't be shocked. And I guess, that's usually what I do for closeout. So,
all right.
Yeah. So thanks again for tuning in for our 100th episode, dear listeners. We'll see you in episode 101. Take care.